The one thing that screams at me the whole way through this is connection, connection, connection. And be prepared that when your child goes from primary school to secondary school, they're going to change and they're going to try and disconnect from you, and that's totally normal. But you've got to keep that relationship with them.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. My name is Noreen Turley, and in this podcast we have a very interesting subject. We're going to talk about the HSE Youth Drug and Alcohol Services, known really to a lot of people in the business, I suppose, as Yoda. We've got Emer Lockery here today. She is a counselling psychotherapist. So hi Emer, how are you? And we have Dr. Monica White, who is a systemic family psychotherapist.
Hi, Noreen.
Hi, lovely to have you here today, ladies, and thank you very much. So I think what we should probably do is just start from the very beginning and ask you guys, what is the Youth Drug and Alcohol Services?
It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
So I suppose we are a multidisciplinary team. So that basically means there's a couple of different disciplines on our team. We work with young people and their parents, young people who are engaged in drug and alcohol use. And that's young people who are, I suppose, at a point of experimentation right up to the point where young people have become more dependent on their drug and alcohol use, and it's interfering with their daily functioning, really. So that's, I suppose, in essence, what we do.
Yeah. We cover a large catchment of Dublin, which is mostly from Southside Dublin, from Tallaght right down to Inchicore and Ringsend. And all of our clients are under 18.
Okay, so ages, what age could it start at?
So the youngest 11, 12,
11,
we've had
12,
up
okay,
to
yeah.
about 18. Yeah.
Okay, and who refers into you? Do you have to get a referral or can you self-refer?
So predominantly the majority of our referrals actually do come from families. About half of our referrals are from the families directly themselves who are in our catchment, and it's just a matter of picking up the phone and giving us a call. And then after that, I suppose we would have referrals from schools, social workers. We've had youth workers referring, a whole variety of services, and I suppose mental health services.
Mental health services would be.
So if somebody has an issue and they're willing to come to see you guys, then you'll take the referral.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And just, I'm not very familiar with this, but I suppose you guys are dealing with it every day. What are the substances that are out there at the moment? What are that age group using, I suppose?
It's a really good question. And I suppose if we do this in a couple of years' time, it's probably going to keep changing.
Yeah.
But I suppose the main substances we see coming in the door are primarily, I suppose, cannabis is the main drug of choice for a lot of the young people attending our service. After that, it's alcohol. And then I suppose you're moving into the likes of nitrous oxide. And I suppose nitrous oxide is, I suppose, a very kind of big word for a substance that a lot of young people are actually inhaling.
How do they inhale it?
It's using a balloon actually is how they use it.
Okay.
So nitrous oxide is a substance that's typically used. I suppose my understanding of it was when you're in labour having a baby is kind of how they use, but it's something that is being abused and young people are buying it in large quantities.
And is it easy to get?
It's absolutely very easy to get,
really?
Unfortunately, yes. And I suppose there's a lot of people out there that probably don't realise the damage it actually causes, but it gives you a very quick effect. Young people really like it, and you won't spot it too easily as a parent, actually. Gives them kind of a little bit of a slight drunken kind of feel, and then it's gone.
It's odourless.
So it doesn't last.
And it's
odourless. You can't
doesn't
pick up
last
a
long.
smell.
No.
So with some other substances like cannabis, you might be able to smell it. With alcohol, you can definitely smell it, but with the nitrous oxide, you can't smell it.
Okay.
So,
and what about with cannabis then and vaping now? That's one thing that, because we've done podcasts on vaping and we've done webinars, and people are constantly saying that the introduction, I suppose, of vapes, that it's just become more prevalent.
Yeah. It's a massive concern for ourselves, and lots of people are working in the area, and parents, I'm sure, who are listening today kind of wonder what's going on. But yes, I suppose not just the young people are coming to us, but I suppose a lot of their peers would definitely communicate that there is a fair proportion of young people who are vaping. And you've got the nicotine vapes, and then you have what's now known as THC vapes, and they are a form of synthetic drug, and they are giving young people the effect of cannabis, I suppose.
Okay.
And I suppose the age does appear that it's starting a bit younger.
It's starting a bit younger, and also because with vaping, you don't know what it equates to. So, for example, how many cigarettes or what would be equivalent in a vape. So that kind of messaging isn't out there. So people don't actually know how much nicotine they're using over the course of a day or 2 days.
Yeah.
And that can be quite difficult, And then with alcohol as well, it tends to be a lot of the time with alcohol, people are using very secretly, or it may be kind of with their friends. And for that, because alcohol is so cheap as well, it's easier for young people to access it now.
So as we didn't mention, I suppose then obviously there's ketamine, cocaine, MDMA, ecstasy. So there'd be other substances we do actually see, and benzodiazepines. They're probably more, I suppose, as a lesser group coming to us are using some of them at the moment, but will be a cross of young people using polydrug use really, and kind of engaging in a couple of different kind of substances, but predominantly cannabis would be their main drug of choice, and then they're maybe trying other substances maybe at the weekend. And that's kind of a typical presentation to our service.
So supposing somebody is referred into you and a child arrives, I mean, like you say, from 11 to 18, and they sit in the chair in front of you, what do you see, or how do you think the child is feeling at that time?
Well, I think we kind of start further back than that.
Yeah.
We actually start with a young person looking at when they come up to our service. It's kind of child orientated and child friendly. So a lot of the time, we realised that between the door of the service and actually sitting in the room, we have a little bit of work to do with the young person to make them feel comfortable. So we would invite them in, we would show them around, we show them our rooms, we show them where they're going to be sitting. We could offer them a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of water just to try to make them feel comfortable.
And are they with their parent at this stage, or their guardian or whatever? They are. Okay, sorry to interrupt you there. Go ahead.
So then when a young person comes in, they can expect to meet one of the staff or several of the staff members as well. And we will take them in with their parents and sit with them and try and tease out, get a picture really of what the issues are that they're struggling with and dealing with as a family. And because our service doesn't just deal with the young person, we also offer services to family members as well. So, and that makes it easier for a young person to attend, because we're kind of saying, yes, we'll be working with you, but actually, by the way, your parents will also be doing some work with us too.
So you look at the whole family.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Yeah.
And that helps to destigmatize the young person a little bit,
I suppose the research would be strong and kind of telling us that a whole family approach to a substance use problem is really the best way to go. And really it is about trying to have the best outcomes for everybody. Going back to your question earlier on, what's it like for the young person? I suppose it is a really good question. And it's probably the bit that we work really hard to try and get right, because it's a really scary place for a young person. And going into any service where there's going to be a therapy component for a child is hard. But absolutely, you've got the extra layer of it being about substance use. And a lot of words have been used, language like addiction, or, I can't even mention some of the other words because I find it even hard to say them, but really negative connotations. And a lot of young people are coming into the room with that in their head, and they actually think that we might think like that too. So we have a lot of work to try and convince young people that actually we certainly don't use the word addiction. We don't see them as being addicted. Certainly that's a term that will get used much later on in their lives. But I suppose when a young person is developing and growing, we look and approach the problem from that of a problematic drug and alcohol use. And in the context that that's, I suppose, something that can change, and they're growing and they're making sense, and they've made some very bad decisions maybe by the time they've got to us. So there's an awful lot of shame coming in the door. Like,
I'm sure.
I often do say to parents, like, imagine yourself as an adult going in and sitting in front of a counsellor, and then add in a bit of shame, and add in addiction, and add in potentially dual diagnosis. So a lot of our young people may be diagnosed or undiagnosed pieces. So there's a package there of anxiety.
Explain dual diagnosis, because for the listeners, they may not be clear what that means. So,
I mean, dual diagnosis means a young person may have another diagnosis from a different service. So we may have young people who have a diagnosis of autism. They may have a mental health diagnosis where they may have depression or anxiety or stuff like that. So that would be called dual diagnosis, where they may have a substance use issue and an underlying mental health issue as well.
And are these kids more, not susceptible, but are they more vulnerable to
Yeah,
know,
I think we know now that all of our brains work differently. So we would use the term neurodiverse and neurodivergent. So we would recognize that all of us are neurodiverse. Like none of our brains work the same way. In the past, we would have said neurotypical, neurodiverse, but now we see that everybody might be neurodivergent. So now we kind of look at that for young people who are neurodiverse, like they may have a learning issue, they may have autism, they may have ADHD, they may have dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, all of those kind of things actually make their brain work differently.
Okay.
And if they're exposed to substances or really begin to use substances, it's going to affect them differently than it would somebody who has none of these issues.
That
so
makes sense when you say it
Yeah.
out.
And their relationship with substances, because when we talk about substances, we talk about young people developing a relationship with substances, and the relationship becomes very deep and it can, throw every other relationship out of their lives.
It can become their best friend.
Overwhelming, their best friend. You always say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, the substance becomes their best friend.
Yeah.
And our kind of role is to try and undermine that relationship and try and look at, okay, do you really want that as a best friend?
Yeah.
Or have you other things in your life that actually can replace that and give you that same.
And working through that, it must be difficult with children, and it's, and children with dual diagnosis, it must be so difficult for them to get to grips with that.
Absolutely. And I suppose, unfortunately, there's a lot of young people coming who have not actually received a diagnosis, maybe for some of the kind of areas that they're having difficulty with. So we've kind of also have to keep that in the back of our minds too. And to be fair, like, it's helpful to have a diagnosis, but also it's about trying to just understand where this young person is in their world and what their life experience is like at that time, and trying to make sense of what are the blocks. They're obviously, if they're in front of us, they're using substances to cope with whatever's going on. And the truth is, it doesn't matter who they are, where they're coming from. Most of the young people's confidence is in their boots for whatever reason.
So, Ema, you're talking about coping mechanisms that children have or young people have, and sometimes they're just at a difficult stage in their life and they start to use substances to try and help them cope.
Yeah.
So how do you then help them develop or to cope with all of the things that they're dealing with?
Yeah, I think just on that, just to clarify that we're talking about adolescence, and adolescence is a time of change and figuring out who you are and your identity, where you fit in the world. What we probably don't want to hear as parents, and I'm a parent myself, is experimenting with substances kind of part of that kind of curiosity and experimentation. But there has to be, for those who get stuck, and it is a minority, but those that do get stuck, there is something about that cohort of young people that there's more going on.
Okay.
So yeah, understanding it from the point of view of they are struggling to cope with whatever's going on in their life, and it is our job as a team and as a collective to kind of try and understand that from the young person's perspective, from the parents' perspective, and kind of put together, I suppose, a plan of how we're going to address it. And the addressing of it, it can look really different, and it should look very different for each young person that comes in the door, really, because they're coming with a different set of needs. But it will obviously always involve direct therapy by myself or one of the other clinicians on the team, and it will obviously involve parental work and family therapy work.
And tell us a little bit about the parental work and family work, because I think that just sounds like such a great service. Yes, you're looking after the young person, but obviously the bigger picture, they need that scaffolding around them to help them cope with it. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's brilliant that you use that word, because we would use it quite often with parents around scaffolding. So we kind of look at, for parents, we know when they come through the door of our service, a huge amount of fear comes in the door with them into your office. So the fear of, okay, what's going to happen to my child? How are they going to be? So a lot of our work, first of all, is actually making connection with the parents and looking at what are their strengths. Number one, they've managed to identify that there's something going on. They've been alert and aware enough to know that something's happening that's not right. And then they've looked for help, which is a huge step for parents to take.
Because confidence.
There is a huge amount of fear of being judged, fear of, if I walk walk through the store, like, are they going to think I'm a bad parent?
Yeah.
All of that sort of stuff. We have to work with parents with that because we're a non-judgmental service. So a lot of the time parents can feel, okay, if I go up there, they're going to really think, oh God, I did a terrible job.
Or would parents probably be afraid that you'd get social
Absolutely.
services
Yeah.
involved,
Oh,
or
yeah,
you get
that's
social
huge
workers,
fear.
and then
Yeah.
depending on where they're from or what they've been through themselves,
Yeah.
there could be
Exactly.
a real fear of any kind of
Yeah.
health
Yeah.
service, you know?
But again, I mean, we would always say no matter what a parent has been or done in their own past, we don't judge.
Yeah.
You know, we have parents who are in their own recovery. We have parents who are maybe still tipping away at substances. We will kind of work with them. While their young person is coming to us, we ask them to minimise the amount of substance use that's going on. Now, that can be a huge conversation because you may have an older brother or sister living at home with parents, because we know that older adults or young adolescents and young adults in their 20s and 30s aren't able to move out. So you could have a very complicated household. So Emer, and I mean, I think one of the first times I started in Yoda, I mean, one of my first family sessions, I think about 7 people in the room with me, and Bobby was kind of going, what is she doing?
Yeah,
You know, because I had granny and I had older brother and we had, you know, girlfriend of older brother, all of that in the room.
And they
with
were
me.
all living.
And
So
they were all
you're
there.
talking about kind of really blended families, that the new modern Ireland, I suppose. And that is difficult for those kids.
Yeah. And we also have families from different cultures. So we would have a lot of families who are coming from a different culture into Ireland.
Yes.
And trying to cope with a teenager who's born in Ireland, growing up in Ireland, but may have very different values from where they grew up. So you have all of that happening as well, you know, that parents are struggling with the cultural piece too.
Oh, it's no joke. It really, it's very difficult.
So our work is kind of with the parents. So we use a kind of program called Nonviolent Resistance, where we actually have a program that we work with the parents as well, which actually helps them to deal with some of the things that the young person might be doing. But in reality, what it does is it helps to empower parents to control what they're doing and to try and build a relationship with the young person. Because our young person, if they're using substances, will have very much that relationship with the substances will have meant that they will have pulled away from parents and they will have excluded them from their lives a lot. So it's about building that connection back again.
And that's it. I suppose we'd often say connection. I suppose, as Monica has really clearly kind of outlined there, young people, when they're substance use and they've pulled back kind of from everybody, particularly when it's become problematic. And that's why, like, we obviously have a specialised role in this journey for the young person, but it will probably have taken a lot of other people to encourage and get the family to actually come into us in the first place. So there's, I suppose it's important that we're kind of clear about our part is one part in a journey of recovery really for the family, but we would really see the importance of other community members and family members as actually being able to, like, it's amazing, like I've often heard, you know, so many young people kind of saying to me, Jesus, I don't want my granny to know what I'm doing, because if she hears, she's going to kill me. And like in my head, I'd be going, right, we've got to get granny in.
Because you can influence
But that's
them.
where leverage, that's where the leverage is, you know. And if there's one person in the family that kid does not want to disappoint, well, that's where we start, because that's where the relationship actually is. And you know, what we do know is, you know, the further out we can get a young person to 18 and into adulthood, where they've had, you know, as little as possible, you know, exposure to substances, the better it is for their growing brain. All the research tells us that the outcomes for young people who are not engaged in substances is far better down the line. So that's, I suppose, our wish for every young person that we're working with is that they're getting that chance really to understand that.
And Emer, if we track back a bit now, so we're obviously the kids who come to you, it's been identified that there is an issue there, or they're coping and they're using substances. But we track back now when we're talking about your average 12-year-old, 13-year-old young person. What are parents looking for? What does it look like when I'm thinking there's something just not right with me? What do I see every day?
Like, what is the presentation?
Yeah, what is the presentation?
And again, it's supposed to depend on the kid. It can look different, but for some young people, it will be, you'll start to notice kind of like school issues tends to be kind of, with some of the more obvious, clear bit of evidence where maybe grades are dropping.
Okay.
They're kind of making an excuse about not getting up in the morning. They're harder to motivate. There's probably a bit more of a mood issue and maybe an oppositionality between the parent and the young person. We're like, no, I'm not doing it, or you can't make me.
But you know, then often people say, well, you know, they're only
They're
It's a
only kids.
teenager. So that's what they're like.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
And
is it a significant change in their behaviour?
so you have two different kinds of kids. You've got, I suppose, the young people who are expressing their emotional kind of discontent outwardly, and then what that can look like, banging doors, not rolling with any kind of rules or expectations that were normally there and they might have always reasonably complied with, but then there's a sudden change. Then you've got the other young people, I suppose, where it's quite internal and they've become very quiet in themselves, become distant from everybody. They're not going to the normal family kind of gatherings that they might normally typically have done. And I suppose there's a couple of pockets of evidence happening at school, it's friends, it's the family system. There's change in a couple of different domains. And I suppose when parents get curious and they start asking questions, and I think that's the best place to start.
What's coming to mind is that's fine if parents notice.
Yeah.
But if parents are maybe living a chaotic life themselves and nobody is really looking at the child or the young person as a whole, they're not really being followed.
Yeah.
Or monitored, which in many cases that's what happens because people are busy and they just have different things going on in their life. I mean, those kids must really fall through the cracks, or maybe they can fall through the cracks.
And some of those young people, unfortunately, do fall through the cracks. Parental presence and keeping a strong eye on what's going on during adolescence is probably one of the key messages that we probably will try and deliver here today. Okay. Adolescence is a really challenging time, and I know every generation kind of said, oh, when we were younger it was different, but I really think with the whole introduction of social media and their lives are pretty much dictated by it now, there's an awful lot more that adolescents have to try and navigate, and they're getting influenced by strong messages that actually at times can be stronger what the parental or community message might be, because that's maybe what they're spending more time listening to. So but yes, unfortunately some of those young people can fall through the cracks, but I mean there's lots of research around one good adult, and it could be a basketball coach, it could be a teacher. There are lots of people keeping eyes on kids, and it's there are a lot of people that would probably initially make that initial prompt to the parent to think there's something wrong, think maybe we need to keep an eye on, and
trust your instinct as well.
Oh my God, gut.
You said that. It's always about your instincts, because teenagers and adolescents is very difficult. It's a time of change anyway. Parts of their brain are developing really quickly, other parts aren't developed at all, and you're kind of looking at, you want them to be able to explore, you want them to have a social life and have fun and interact with other peers, but on the other side, how do you monitor that? How do you make sure that scaffolding that you mentioned earlier there is there, so that parents are providing that scaffolding? And it might not be parents, it might be adult caregivers, it could be an older brother or sister if the parents aren't able to do that, or because we've people in loads of different care arrangements as well.
So Monica, I know that you have tips for parents on how to help your child develop resilience. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I think particularly when we're talking about drug and alcohol issues, we really are looking at parents being aware, first of all, building a relationship with your child, and not after things have started to go wrong. It actually needs to be before that. So when your child is going into, from primary school to secondary school, that's when really parents have to be hyper kind of aware of what's happening, building relationship with other parents, particularly, because your child is moving into a new area. So we would see a lot of parents coming up who don't know who the other parents are that their young person is hanging around with, or they haven't done that kind of intensive work. So we would say network with other parents is really important. Building a relationship with your young person so that even if they know that you're not going to like what they're saying to you, that they still feel confident to come and talk to you about it. Because a lot of the time that's what our young people mightn't be doing in the substance use area, where they're trying to protect their parents as well, so they don't want them to upset parents.
So all of this information you're giving me now, or we're giving our listeners, is, I'm sure it's coming direct from young people that you've taken care of in the past. This is what your young people are telling you that they need.
I had a young person the other day, and he's actually finishing up with us now and doing great. And I was like, what's the one thing that kind of helped or changed things? Now, obviously, he told me how amazing it was coming to us, but apparently...
well, that's nice to hear. That's nice to hear, Emer, and I'm sure you are.
Very important.
Yes.
Yeah. But what he said was, it's Mom knowing where I am and stepping it up, and she's wide to I suppose
What's
how
going
to
on?
spot things now when I'm up to things I shouldn't be up to. A lot of that was through the work with the family therapist, and that was really, really important. So I am a psychotherapist myself, and it's really important that we kind of give the message that sending your child to singular therapy on its own and not providing parents with a support scaffold around how to navigate this is really challenging.
How do
for
they
parents.
know how to deal with them or
Exactly.
what to look
it's
out
too
for?
difficult. So
It's too hard.
but I suppose I do worry about the parents that think I'll send them to a therapist and that'll fix this by itself. And a more robust kind of response, it is about looking to get parental support as well at the same time, because then you're being equipped to deal
and I
with
mean,
it.
we would always say the parents are the experts on their own
Yes,
children.
of course.
We're in their child's life for a few months, you know.
And it, just you're saying about time, I guess, how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
How long would young people be in your service for? Or on average, do you have an average even?
Yeah, so I suppose the typical probably about 6 months, 3 to 6
yeah,
months.
3 to 6 months, yeah.
Yeah, but we would also
Yeah.
be working for some young people. We'd have cases that we'd be working with the mental health services as well. So
Yeah.
That's great though.
It's a
So
very
you'd be
big part of
liaising
it.
with them and
Absolutely.
making sure that
Yeah.
the same message has been given. And
And
is
these
it
young-
difficult to get parents? Is it difficult to get the whole family in? I mean, I can't imagine the complexities of some of the families that you deal with.
It absolutely can be.
It can be, it can be, because again, parents can find it. They fear judgment. They fear, that somebody's going to tell them, "Oh, you've done this really badly, wrongly," which we don't, by the way. But I think a lot of the time we can have, particularly since the pandemic, families have become so different. Young people have struggled through the pandemic. We have that as well. But I think also parents, it's really difficult if you have a service that is working 9 to 5. So we work really hard to try and get dads in. So we would have appointments after, 5 o'clock. Because again, if you shut your service at 5 and somebody's
Can't
working,
facilitate somebody working.
So we can do online appointments with parents. We do like to see them in person, for maybe the first or second appointment.
To build up a relationship.
But we've
with
had
them,
parents join in our parents group from Disneyland, in Paris and
they'll just
other countries.
They'll just stick with it. This is their appointment. This is it. They see the benefit of it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but I suppose and the core bit of our work is really, really building that relationship between the young person and the parent, and I suppose the parent have maybe a better understanding of what might be hard for the kid and why are they leaning into substances to help them regulate these difficult emotions. So there's that's really where the real work is, is trying to kind of help the parent kind of understand that picture.
Help the parent kind of understand that. And then because we're kind of co-working with, so family therapy is co-working with the individual work as well. So a lot of the time we'd go in together, and then we'd have parents and young person and ourselves in the room, where we can actually celebrate the things that are going to help. Like when a young person doesn't use substances and actually deals with an emotion and is able to go to parents and say, "Look, I went into school, it was really hard, but I came home and I was fine. I had my sandwich," and all of that.
And they're probably delighted with themselves.
Chuffed.
Just small senses of achievement that help them with their confidence.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And I suppose it's, even though I suppose we're considered like a more of a treatment service in the community, I suppose it still is an early intervention, and the sooner and earlier people can get in, I suppose the better, better the outcomes are for people,
Yeah.
This is all, when we've been doing these podcasts, everything is early intervention.
Don't wait.
Early intervention. If you have an inkling, go and get help. There's help there if you look for it. I mean, we all know that there's waiting lists in certain areas. We know that.
Yeah.
But people are working behind the scenes to try and improve those. But there is help there. So, Emer, one of the things that I wanted to, you mentioned earlier on, before we started the podcast, about the language that parents use around each other and sometimes are around the young person, and sometimes maybe if parents aren't together, or if there's, like we say, blended families and one parent is pitting the other parent against each other, and it's really difficult for children.
Yeah, I suppose for me it's probably one of the, unfortunately, it's something I hear a lot from young people, of where they will talk about how, let's say, I'll take an example of a mum and dad splitting, and the dad maybe has done kind of things which have been really challenging and putting the family under a lot of stress, and that boy or that girl being told, "Well, you're just like your dad," and in a moment of, the mum might be under pressure and upset and stressed, and the kid has kind of broken some rule. But unfortunately, because adolescence is a time of figuring out who you are and your identity, when you start to hear parents say that you might be bad just like they are, and the kids will simplify things. They're not going to put a kind of a complex understanding on it. The internalization of that for a kid it's just hugely damaging, and actually can take a bit of time to kind of unravel and help the kid to kind of realize, no, you actually are a little bit of your mom, a little bit of your dad, and actually you're a big bit of yourself.
Yeah. And for them to
know?
realize that they
Yeah.
are themselves and it's
Yeah.
okay to be yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing of peer pressure.
Yeah.
Peer pressure, I think, is such a huge thing for kids. And I know we
Yeah.
spoke about social media, but
Yeah.
how do we help kids deal with this whole peer pressure thing when it comes to substance misuse?
I think it is really difficult because there's so much kind of availability. You know, we know when availability goes up, that people have difficulty in avoiding substances. And I think if you're looking at, if you're a young person who's either neurotypical or neurodiverse and trying to fit into a peer group, a lot of the time, you know, even though your own kind of family values might be slightly different, you still will feel, okay, if I need to join in with this.
Yes.
So avoiding peer pressure and how to deal with peer pressure, again, we would say to parents to actually talk to your young person about it. You know, allow them to tell you if things aren't going well in their group. You know, we often expect our young people to be strong enough. You know, the old Nancy Reagan thing of just say no. But there's very few of our young people who will be able to be strong enough to stand up to their peer group. So sometimes we ask parents to step into that space because we often have young people who come up to us who would say, oh, their parent is really strict. We can't use that in their house.
Yeah,
You know?
interesting.
And you're kind of saying, yeah, great, you know, good on you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time parents feel, well, I can't put in too many boundaries because they're going to lose friends. But particularly we would say for parents to step into that place and say, look, I really don't want you using XYZ substances. And that means that a young person can go into their peer group and say, well, my mum and dad would go ballistic. I can't actually do
so
that.
they can use
so they
that.
have a way out of saying,
Yeah.
you know, my parents are really strict, I can't go home.
So we need to be teaching young people this early, kind of like you said, in national school, secondary school, which I know that it is in some of the curriculums and that, but I suppose it just needs to be spoken about more.
It's okay for parents to have expectations. And
Yeah.
in fact, like we'd encourage parents to have expectations. It's okay to expect your child not to do this, but it's important to give them the tools around it. And I suppose reminding ourselves that adolescence is all about being part of your herd. Who do I belong to? What's my group? Young people who have, you know, clubs and activities and places they can go to be themselves, the more of that they have in their lives, the better chances that even if this becomes an issue, it doesn't stay stuck. It can become a non-issue because they have other groups to kind of lean in on. So I suppose when a young person's in front of me and they get to a point where they're kind of saying, listen, Emer, I really want to stop all of this, I suppose that's where we start. We start to look at what peer groups they're in, what other groups are in their community, where might they have maybe a connection where there is less substances or no substances, and how might they begin to build that connection. So like it takes a village to rear a child, and keeping an eye on what's going on in your village and what's available to your children to kind of keep them involved.
Absolutely. Look, I think we can't avoid the alcohol question and allowing children to drink at home. So what's your opinions or what's your advice for parents on that?
I think we both take that separately. Monica, you might.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say the longer that we can keep young people away from alcohol, the better, you know. And I think particularly what we would say is you have to model what you want to see. Okay. So if parents are coming home on Friday night and saying, right, I had a really stressful weekend, cracking open a bottle of wine, and that's happening 2 or 3 times a week, you're going to model that for your young person. So we need to be modeling what we want to see. Again, we know that for young people, alcohol, depending on their brain chemistry and depending on their makeup, for some neurodiverse young people, alcohol is not great for them because again, it'll make life more difficult. It can dial up their sensory system, or it can dial it down, which makes them less acute around risk. They may not be able to see risk. So a lot of the time we're looking at, you know, what does alcohol do to a young person's brain? And the longer that we can keep that away from a young person's brain, the better. Now, I mean, we are in Ireland, we are an Irish culture, so we know that lots of families coming from different places will have difficulty with this. You know, we have some cultures where alcohol is more accepted. and it's introduced earlier. And again, people would look at that, but they have a very different relationship and culture around alcohol. Whereas we have a real binge culture in Ireland around alcohol, and that's been known for many, many years. And so again, you're kind of looking at trying to give people a message, trying to give young people a message that alcohol, we want them to have a relationship with alcohol that's going to last their whole life.
Yeah.
If they get into trouble with alcohol early, that relationship is not going to be there.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to kind of look at. You have to treat it with respect, and you have to treat it responsibly. And if you don't do that, it'll bite you.
That's a really, it's a lovely way to, if you can describe it in a lovely way, it's a non-judgmental way as well, the way that you've described it there, Monica. But I guess, Emer, the advice really is to say to parents, as much as possible, encourage
same
your
with
kids.
Every chemical, really. I mean, as I look at substances from a chemical perspective, whether it's alcohol or cannabis, and there is a lot of families that would obviously engage in cannabis use as well as parents, as adults at the weekend or on a Friday evening. And if young people are watching, how do you wind down? What do you do when you're very, very stressed? They're going to model on that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
And so we have had a lot of young people kind of saying to us, well, I'm in here and they're telling me to sort out my whatever use, and they're doing what they do at the weekend. So your kids are not stupid either, so we've kind of asked parents to kind of watch that. And that's not, I'm a parent myself of teenagers. It is not an easy, certainly the alcohol piece is certainly not an easy piece to tackle, but I would say recognize the fact that young people like being together. You can still allow that to happen, and you can still make that fun and interesting. And you do need to think about how you're going to make it fun and interesting. Ask them.
Yeah.
Just ask them. Keep them involved, keep talking to them, get their opinions and listen to what they're telling you.
Yeah. I mean, one of the parents that we had a great way of doing it, like that they actually said they opened up the back garden.
Yeah.
They donated the back garden to the young people. And the only kind of rules around it where you couldn't bring alcohol or substances in, but like that, it just meant that their young people had
some place to
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and had a place where that they could actually just be themselves.
And just a safe environment, kind of.
Yeah. Parents had to turn a blind eye at the back,
not look. Pull the curtains.
But don't turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
And if I'm being honest, I think there is a little bit of turning blind eyes goes on at times in certain families, and you're not doing your child any favour by doing that or minimising it or normalising that as that's just to be teenagers. You do need to tackle it. Means that they're not going to be too delighted with you, but it's better to address these issues.
And we didn't talk about, actually, Emer, we didn't talk about the peer pressure from other parents.
Yes, I think that's bigger.
Which is
really
that's
huge. Great. That's a really important point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, peer pressure from other parents can be quite high as well. We would have parents who would say that, well, all of the parents in my young person's year, they're all allowing them to drink at home. And why can I be different? Can I do it differently?
Or they go for sleepovers, and like sleepovers is definitely a big one where there's a fair amount of drinking and drug use happening kind of in some families. And like we were kind of saying, like if the substance use is happening during the sleepover, well then the most obvious place to start tackling is the sleepovers.
Yeah.
Sometimes this stuff can sound actually very complicated. But in other ways, it's sometimes it's a simple approach, and kind of reminding parents you are actually the best expert on your child. Give your self time and space to reflect. And if you think you can't get your child to a therapist to work on these issues, you go to the therapist to get assistance with how you might work on the issues. And we would have some families who would say, I can't get so-and-so to come up to you. We would say, that's grand. Our family therapist will meet with you for a couple of sessions.
Brilliant. So then you deal of how to deal with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic, because then you'll be able to talk to the person. You'll know how to react. You won't overreact.
Yeah.
And you're teaching them the skills.
And I mean, that's kind of what happens. Like a lot of the parents that we would deal with, whereas, so they're working on their own activation, their own kind of, somebody comes through the door, they may have, they may be affected by alcohol or other substances, or they may come in, with cannabis on board, and parents kind of immediately are getting activated. And the problem is to kind of, one of the things that happens is they will try and deal with the situation immediately. And we would always say that a sign of when when our parent begins to reflect and say, okay, I'm not going to deal with this now. I'm going to tackle this in the morning. And, so a lot of the time the parents are dealing with their own activation really is a way, because they're afraid and they're scared by what's happening. So sometimes it's when we can hear a parent who says, right, I had this situation happen, but I stayed, I pressed the pause button, I kept calm, I didn't get activated, I walked away and I said, I'll come back to you in 5 minutes and talk to you about it.
We actually got a call yesterday from a parent, and they were finished up with this as well, and she was like, I'll never forget the day, Emer, where you told me I needed just to stop and just press the pause button. And she left a few expletives there telling me what she thought of me at the time. And she said, you know what? She said, only for you. If I hadn't listened to that advice, and she said when she started to see that advice was actually working, that's when the trust in that if she sticks with this, it's going to work, and it has worked. And so for me, that's one of the biggest messages we want to give here, is that we love what we do, because
it comes out.
I mean,
it's fantastic to know that you love what you do.
The families who come to us, we just think they're amazing and brave and brilliant, and they come with lots of things to teach us actually. And they have the parents and the young people have taught us so much.
A lot of the things that we pass on to parents are actually tips
from other parents.
Things that they've tried, things that they've used, way they've handled different situations that have actually worked with their young person, because again, that's really coming from a place where parents have tried and tested some of these things, so that's what really works for them and really works for the young people.
That's brilliant. And look, I suppose we need to come to an end. We've been talking for a long time. I think there's a lot more to talk about, but look, there's been a lot of messages that we've given to parents and people that are listening, and we hope that it helps them in some way. And we know that they can go to drugs.ie. But if you were to give, I suppose, a nugget of advice, Emer, and I'll come to you then, Monica, as well, to give you the final word. And what do you think? What's the nugget if you're noticing, or I suppose, what's the nugget of advice you'd give to parents around this whole area?
Listen, I'm a parent myself, and the one thing that screams at me the whole way through this is connection, connection, connection. And be prepared that when your child goes from primary school to secondary school, they're going to change and they're going to try and disconnect from you, and that's totally normal. But you've got to keep that relationship with them. Don't accept that they're going to completely disconnect just because they're teenagers. You got to keep working on that relationship.
That's really good.
That's your biggest place to be able to influence change.
And Monica?
I think, for me, I think that the main one is parental presence, and also parents being an effective team, not pulling against one another as in we need to do it this way or we need to do it that way. Actually sitting down as parents and talking about, okay, how are we going to handle this? And who's the best person to talk to the young person? And do we need other help, to bring that in? And that's really important. And if you're bringing in other help, as in, asking for advice from friends or family members or whatever, it's not to disempower yourself, it's actually to get what other parents have tried that has worked.
So it doesn't mean that you're failing, it just means that you're asking for advice. I think that's so important, or asking for help.
And the truth is, from the cradle to the grave, aren't we all going to need help with something at some stage?
Absolutely.
And that's what we see that as being part of just that trajectory of change in someone's life. I don't know about you, but I know I've had to ask people for help at different stages in my life, and that is okay.
Yeah, it is okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, if just to our listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with us about the podcast, please send us an email to healthandwellbeing.communications@hse.ie, and that email address is in the podcast information wherever you're listening to this. As always, we'd like to ask you to please share this episode with a colleague or a friend or a family member who you think would be interested in this topic. I think there's a lot of information here, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.